creation of knowledge more effective and meaningful, and in the process make it visible. And he found 3 characteristics that are important to note. One he refers to as adaptive expertise. It's cultivating this notion of flexible performance. That is, the ability to judge uncertainty, pay attention in the process to the intermediate thinking processes. To some extent, for the first time in our history, we have the kinds of tools in things like Blackboard that allow us to capture those intermediate processes and actually make meaning out of them as we understand how knowledge is built. The second area is something that he referred to as embedded pedagogies. This is, in fact, not just cognitive stuff, but new media and pedagogies that are not distancing or impersonal, but highly effective, highly intuitive, and therefore provide authentic learning environments. And the third area is socially situated pedagogies. In fact, I think this is the one that's more and more emerging as critical. That is, learning with this new media and in this context is fundamentally a social process. That the technologies actually allow us to situate the learning in intellectual communities that can extend far beyond just the classroom. Okay, there we go. So what do students need in the ability, in the process of engaging in this way? They need learning plans. They need learning diaries, if you will, or e-portfolios, or e-portfolio-like tool sets. They need blended active engagements that involve both classroom and larger activities outside of it that allow for adaptive scheduling and flexibility of the learning context. And these might come from things like Google Apps, or they might come from PebblePad, or they might come from Ahara, or they might come from tools that we're building like collections, or any of a number of things that are available. Staff, on the other hand, need a supported place to experiment and share their best practices. One activity that our location for this is something called collaboratories, which are spaces where they can practice this and try out the things that they're being confronted with and asked to engage with. That involves new physical spaces, that involves collaborative spaces that are flexible, that involves dynamic spaces. The Stanford folks will recognize this, I think. And the community needs distributed learning technologies that support the faculties. Most importantly, they need a massive redesign of what we have as search, so that the richness of the learning opportunities that are going on our campuses are shared not only within the campus, but across the communities within which our campuses reside. And we saw kind of a hint at that, I think, when looking at the calendars that the Mobile Learn platform has. And one of the comments that I recall being made in the Mobile Learn presentation, I'm not sure if it was Andrew who made it or not, but they noticed that the number of downloads of the Mobile Learn app at Stanford were in the terms of 60,000. Well, there's only 12,000 students at Stanford. Clearly, there were a lot of people downloading it because they were interested in knowing the activity going on the campus. And that's the kind of engagement that we all want our local communities to have. We need physical teaching spaces that mirror what's required for disciplinary practice. The box like this is not like any place that we practice our disciplines, for the most part anyway. So we need to actually create the spaces that reflect what the discipline does. Their students can, in the process, engage in that peripheral participatory disciplinary activity, which concentrically moves them closer and closer to becoming the practitioner of whatever the discipline is that they're training to become. Now I want to shift this towards what this means for the VLEs and the directions that companies like Blackboard are moving in. To do that, I want to suggest that there are emerging technologies that are that are cropping up, that they're in some sense being confronted with and forced to respond to. So I'm going to look briefly at what those emerging technologies are, and then bring us full circle to what that means for the emerging VLE 3.0. So, many of you may know about the Horizon Report. This is a personal area of great interest to me since I'm on their board and have been responsible for bringing the Horizon Report to ANZ, Australia and New Zealand community. There'll be the 2011 version released in the next 3 weeks, but I'll talk about last year's data here. So the Horizon report looks at key trends and context for the emerging technologies, and then puts them in 3 time bands. Are most of you familiar with this report? Yes? No? I see nodding heads that indicate either acceptance or that you're nodding off. Okay. So, key trends. The key trends that emerged from last year is that the value of innovation and the value of creativity is increasingly recognized as important. That it will continue to have significant impact on university campuses, that it is clearly vital to student lives, and that it is changing the way we think of learning environments. The critical challenges that emerged from this last report were the importance of reassessing what we mean by evaluation, addressing the aging of our learning spaces, defining and operationalizing the notion of digital literacy in our curriculum, and the idea that the use of technology needs to be deeply integrated into the curriculum and not an ICT box on the side. So the technologies to watch from that year emerged in 3 time bands, the first being 1 year or less, which is the William Gibson description of its technology. That's the future is here, it's just unevenly distributed. The idea is that these things are well ensconced in many places and should be in most places. So things that came to the list were what seems, I think now, obvious: mobile computing. And we've seen a good deal about that through, for example, the mobile learn environment, which I think is, in fact, a very powerful context. And the second is private clouds, cloud computing, but in the Australia-New Zealand context, it's private cloud computing because of concerns here about privacy and protection of data that are not as widely shared in the US. Examples in this case are Amazon, for example, moving its major server farm to service the Southeastern Asian market to Singapore, or Curtin University and QUT embarking in major cloud computing projects, both for saving money and also for scaling dynamic demand. In the 2 to 3 year time frame, we have open content as a major influence on teaching, learning, and creativity. And I have to plug at this point Creative Commons, which has done a terrific job in Australia by sharing with us materials and guidelines and ideas about how we can go about taking advantage of open content in various ways. And then also in the 2 to 3 year horizon, virtual and augmented alternate realities. Now, QUT actually a couple of years ago, created a virtual introduction to their campus by sending every registered student a little piece of paper with this on it. When held up to a webcam, it presented a 3D animation that welcomed them personally to the campus. But in a more direct academic context, you have things like the AR Media plugin for Google SketchUp, which takes and allows you to create a SketchUp and then make a 3D printout or print a code on a piece of paper, hold that up to webcam, and the result is being able to render that Google SketchUp as a 3D model that you can hold and turn around and look at. So there, you'll see in a second when they do the cutaway version, the actual printed code that's on the piece of paper. You can see it there in the middle. That is actually rendering that 3D model for the students to use. And then in the 4 to 5 year horizon, we have location-based technologies. These include things like Glimpse. Have any of you used Glimpse? Glimpse is kind of the reverse stalker tool. Instead of you being followed, you choose to send where you are to someone else, either through Twitter or Facebook or just in an email. And when you do that, you essentially turn on your GPS on your mobile device, and then your movements are plotted real time on a map that anybody can watch. So in this case, he's going to indicate where he is and send it to the person's Facebook account. And then when the individual logs into Facebook and takes a look at the link that's there, it brings up the map and in real time shows them exactly where they are. So instead of saying I'm running late, you can say, this is where I am. You can tell when I'm going to be there. Now, I'll continue on. And the other interesting location is the Commonwealth Bank in Australia. Anybody use this one yet? Yep. Okay, so someone who has. So this is an app you look through your phone, and the augmented reality goes to look up the databases of the property you may be interested in.
I think we can manage it. What would the repayments be?
Now, if anybody's actually used it, you know as well as I do that the rapidity of the snapping of those images coming up there is nowhere near the true reality. But the idea is there, and it does perform that way. So in this case, they're looking down the block at other houses and seeing how they were priced and sold.
I really need it too. And we do need to think about the future, the resale value.
So this is actually an app that's available today from Commonwealth Bank. And then finally, anybody using Tag What? Not yet. Tag What allows you to put virtual reality tags on any image anywhere. So you could create tags that when someone is holding up their phone with this application, they will see the tags that you planted for them to work with. So you can link them to video, you can link them to photos. And then when someone walks through an environment with their camera on, you can see down here that those tags are there. And you can target them to individuals or to groups. So you can think about ways you might use this in various kinds of classes in an academic context. And then smart devices is the other 5-year horizon thing, where we have things like siftables.
Also some neat possibilities for...
Siftables are little small technology devices that sense their location and what's around them. In this case, the device is doing an addition algorithm that's making Fibonacci sequences.
Fibonacci sequence that I'm making with a simple equation.
So just by moving them around, they sense what's around them. In this case, it's a word game. And so after a few seconds, it allows the person to create words, and when it sees that it's a correct word, it gives them points. If they don't do anything for it, it shuffles the deck and lets them start over again. And finally, you've probably seen Pranda's example of Sixth Sense. It's not going to show up well here, I don't think, because the video is a bit dark. But in this case, they're using about $350 worth of off-the-shelf technology. A Pico projector, which he's wearing around his neck, right there, which is projecting outwardly. And the software that's written, that's being interpreted via a camera that he's wearing on his head. So it's tracking his fingers and allowing him to draw on the projected surface. And the idea here is to enable the environment around you with technology sense, not by computationally building that technology into the objects, but by projecting that computational capability onto the objects. So in this case, he's able to project images, and when he's walking around, he can do gestures. That's a camera snapshot. And when he does it, the camera on his hat takes the picture. Because the interpretation by the camera of his fingers in that shape tell it that that's the snap that he wants. And then he can take those particular pictures. That's the Building 10 Dome at MIT. They can take those pictures and then put them on the surface that he was just at and move them around. So you don't need to have the Microsoft Surface table to do this. And he goes on with various other kinds of things. All of these things are captured in the Horizon report, which is available freely from the NMC. But the value now that this implies is to think about the VLE or the LMS and think about what its fundamental important characteristics are. What are the core requirements that the VLE needs from an institutional perspective? What are the academic and student demands of the VLE? And all of us know that one of the very first things is it's got to be simple, right? I mean, very complex interactions are not going to be supportable. And there has to be specific training available for academics and students to be able to pick up even the very simple interface. From an institutional perspective, it's critical that the VLE provides identity integration, auto-creation of class sites, auto-population of class participants, ease of institutional technology, support, and automatic grade processing. Whatever the VLE does, from whomever you get it from, it's got to do these things well. That's critical. But there are criticisms that people have waged against the VLE, that it's teacher-centric, that it's content-focused, that it's teacher-sequenced, that it's closed from the web, and that it has limited opportunities for students to own and manage their learning experiences. Well, that has often been put in contrast then to the rise